Welcome back everybody. We'll be assembling our engine today for the Ute. I've brought it up to the front because I live on a hill and it's pretty hard to drag it up as a complete engine. So we'll start punching things together. If you haven't watched the previous videos of the teardown of this engine or us pulling it out of the car, go check them out. So the first thing I'll be doing with the block was getting it all ready for assembly. So I'll be putting in some brass Welsh plugs. These are just a 1 5/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 2 at the back as well, but the ones at the back we can't really get to because the stand's in the way, so we'll have to do that when the engine's off the stand. But we'll do that first. So we'll flip the motor over. Instead of just punching these straight into the hole, why don't you put a bit of silicone around them so they don't leak? You pain in the arse if they did while it's in the car. Usually take, if you haven't used your silicone for a while, I take the first bit and just throw that away because that's usually all half dried up and whatever. The worse it smells, the better it is. Once it's sitting there, I use a socket that's appropriately sized. Sit it on there, hammer. There we go. That's one in. So that's all our plugs in. I also had these little plugs, little drains on each side. Had to put them in as well. They come in the kit, but they went in fairly easy. Now on to final clean. So we've got to make sure that all the galleys and everything, all the dust's out of them before we start actually putting parts in it. And then it'll be putting the crank in. That'll be next. So on the emphasis of everything being clean when you put it back together again, so here's our main caps. See, it's got this old silicone shit and this sort of thing, all that has to come out, so everything has to be cleaned to put back together. So I'll clean these up and continue on putting them back together. So I've got everything laid out for assembly. Crank's ready to go, block's ready to go, clean, bearings are set out, everything. I've already checked everything. This crank has been cut 10 under already. It's been cut 10. So I've got 10 under bearings for it. And one thing you cannot cock up, if you do this, bugger this up, just throw it in the bin. These here with the holes, got to go in the holes in the block. So to put a bearing in, all you pretty much do is see the, come on camera, do it, come on, there we go. That there, that's got to line up with the tab on the block, and you can kind of push it in and see, that's the job of the hole. So now the shells are in, we're ready to go to put the crank in. Before I put the crank in, I usually like to get my finger and feel around. There's nothing there that shouldn't be there. They say about that you're not supposed to touch bearing surfaces with your fingers. I call bullshit. I don't think it's going to have a problem. Get these all covered in the assembly lube and we'll drop the crank in. So I'm just using this moly based assembly lube. Some people don't like it, it's real thick, but I've never had a problem with it. It's good for the initial start, won't wipe bearings out or anything. Now we're going to do the same to the caps, throw them on. So we've got our bearings in the caps. So here's a cap, and this one's pretty obvious which one's number 1, because it's the only one that is not got the thrust in the back and doesn't have 4 bolts. But if this was a 2-bolt main, all of them would look the same, and they have to go back on which they came off. So that one's pretty obvious, so that's number 1. But you see here, before engine come apart, so I'll put 2 dots there, 3 dots there, and so on, that sort of thing. And also they are directional. See, there's an arrow there, that's supposed to face towards the front. So we'll get them lubed up and all thrown on. So when we're putting down the main bolts, I just use this. That's just to be fast. Do not do them up tight. So once this thing starts to stop right before it starts clicking, because that's when you create damage. But just to get them all down, that should, like that there, that's it. That's all you do. Work from your inside out. So that's the crankshaft in. So all that is it's still loose, but people usually put a little bit of engine oil on the threads of the bolts, but I just had them all cleaned with diesel only about 30 minutes ago, so they're all slippery and they're all went down even. And next bit is we'll torque it all up. So now I'm going to be torquing up the main caps, so the inner bolts, so that counts for all of these, and the in ones I'll be doing at 70 foot-pounds, and the outer ones, which is these the outside ones, I'll be doing 65. We're working my way from the inside out, so I'll start off with the main row and I'll work out to the other 6 afterwards. So we got all our bolts torqued up, and we can see our crankshaft moves real smooth, which is good, and there's no binding spots or anything. Spins really nice. So that's the cranking. Now we can move on to pistons and rods. So guys, what I'm going to be doing now is putting the new pistons on the old rods, and what I've found is that I'm trying to get to the closest weight without rebalancing the assembly. So I found that using the old pin with the new piston was the closest way to get the same weight on the pistons as the ones that were in the motor. So these are a little bit lighter, I think they were. So it's only a few grams, shouldn't notice it. We're not spinning it that fast. So we'll get to putting these pistons on. One more thing is to make sure that that notch goes into the right way on the rod. So we'll get to heating the rods up. That'll probably do. Bit of lobe. Hold it on. There we go. So that's our new piston on our conrod, which is good. Just times that by 8. You don't really, just kind of eyeball the pin. It's not something that has to be absolutely perfect. It's like the only thing in an engine that, you know, you can have a bit of slack in where the pin sits. Doesn't have to be perfectly centered, as long as it's around about there. Yeah. And also just let the rod cool down in its own time. Don't quench it, don't put it in water, just let it sit until it's cold. So I'm just getting rings or pistons ready for putting in the motor. So I'm just using cast rings, nothing special with these. These are just normal old boring cast rings. I've gapped them to 30 thou on the top because I'm thinking I'm going to be running a little bit of boost maybe later. That's for later, but we have to prepare for that now. Also with the rings, the top one, it's the same all the way around. Like the end doesn't matter if it's upside down or not because there's no chamfer. The bottom one has to be put on a certain way because you see there's a chamfer on that, and you know it says top as well on it there. So that is directional, but the top one shouldn't matter. And we'll install them now. So once you got the rings on the piston, I usually run the gaps 180 degrees out from each other to keep a good seal. And now we'll throw it into the block. So we're now ready to put our first piston in. So to make sure everything has to be clean in the bore, there's one more wipe before you put it together. Make sure there's nothing on the journal of the crank. And plenty of lubricants. I'm just using WD-40 to lube up the bore. I've also done the same thing before I put the piston compressor over the piston. So I got my piston and compressor sorted. So lube on the bearing, on the pin as well, and we'll slide it in. So usually I get the compressor flat with the deck, and then now I move the journal furthest away from the rod. There we go, that's one. And then with your other hand, guide it onto the crank journal. There we go. That's in. I'm going to grab our other cap. So that's now lubed up with the assembly source. Just smear it around. And you put that on and make sure both tangs are on the same side. That is our first piston in. So that's the first one in of 8. We actually did number 2 first. Number 1's over here. Doesn't really matter. But I will get back to you when the rest of them are in. So there we go, guys. That's all the pistons in for the bottom end. It was awesome. Just did it after work today. And we'll flip it over now and torque up everything in the bottom end and double check everything so nothing is loose. Make sure nothing is loose. So now guys, we're back on the cylinder heads. Just got these back from the machine shop. There was a dodgy repair right here, but it's flat now. Guys said it'd be fine there. You know, where the fire ring goes, it's all good. But we're pulling the valves out of, see, it's been machined, but we're just pulling the valves out to relap them and put new seals and shit through them. So yeah, see, it's crusty on that side, mint on that side. We'll get back to you when something more interesting happens. So we have both sets of heads apart now, and just looking at our ports, they're all a little bit rusty. We're just going to lap the valves, just a quick job like that, get all the rust and shit out. And yeah, we started cleaning up valves, so you know, they look alright compared to what they were. All we've done is just put them in a vise and used a wire wheel, or not that one, but a different one, and just gone around until all the carbon is off and they look good enough to put back in. So we've got one of our cylinder heads assembled. We've still got the other one to do, but all these are for our engine are they're a 188 casting, 186 something. They're a double hump head. So we've got 64cc chambers, 202 intake, 1.6 exhaust. It should do pretty well for what we're doing. So these heads I've just slapped together, the cheapies. So cleaned them up with just lapping the valves and cleaning out everything that's junk. I got them decked as well, so they're nice and flat. The valve spring is just an LS1 valve spring. Well, not stock there, but they were supposed to be for them, but the diameter is the same on the seat. And the stock locks and retainers, and they should do the job okay. So guys, had a bit of a late night tonight because we spent a lot of time making things look nice, but that's just all the, that's just you don't need to do this to make engine work, but I like it to look nice, so I've done it in titanium grey in 2K, so it should never come off. It's also good to have some sacrificial rocker covers. It makes masking things a lot easier. So now that our heads are finished, we can move on to installing our camshaft. So on the camshaft, we're going to use plenty of lube on the lifters, well, and the lobes as well. And we're using a gear, so we can slide in there easy. We can use it as kind of a lever to help us guide it in, and we'll get to that now. So with our cam in, we'll go to put on our timing gear and chain. It's the one that was in the engine, and I ran it for about 4,000 Ks without any problems, and had no slack in the chain, so I don't see any reason to replace it. It's already a Rollmaster set, double row, and we also got a thrust washer to put on there, so we'll get to that now. So that's our timing set now on. Never mind the rust, but nothing wrong with the chain. All I've done is just dot to dot, nothing fancy. It is a bit of a hotted up cam. It's a, I don't exactly remember what the part number was, but it's crane cams. It's around about 230 at 50 on duration, just under half an inch lift. And I think it's on a 109 circle. So it'll sound good, but it's just the same one that I had in it before. And we'll continue on. We'll put on our fancy bits now, so timing cover and all that sort of thing. So here I am just putting the seal into the timing cover. So all I've got, I've pulled the old one out, and you can do that with the back of a hammer or underneath with a flat blade screwdriver to push it out. And to put a new one in, I just lay another one over it, a new one over it, and get a piece of wood like that and put it on the edge of something so don't bend the timing cover, and strike a mallet on the top, and it will push it in. See, just like that. Didn't damage any of the paint. Awesome. Ready to go on. So I'm going to put on the timing cover, and I've got my gasket here, and all I'm going to do is just put a light smear of silicone around the whole thing. Just make sure there's no leaks, and also it helps you make sure the gasket stays there when you put your timing cover on. So we'll get to that now. See, easy, it stays there. So that's our stock timing cover on with stainless hardware that you can buy from my eBay store, which will be linked in the description. So now I've got the motor flipped over, and what we'll start doing is putting on things like the oil pump and the oil filter adapter and the sump, or the oil pan if you're American. So we've got our pump on. All it is a stock pump, nothing fancy. There was nothing wrong with it before. Just pulled it apart and made sure nothing was damaged. It all went back together fine. It had a good oil pressure before, so it does the job. Stock job will be fine. Now we get to do the pan, but we have to try and figure out what we're going to do with our single piece rear main seal, and our engine stand might get in the way, so we'll have a look what we have to do with that first. So I've just found something out that was good. Is that I wanted to get that rear main seal piece. This is a single piece rear main seal block. I need to get that piece to go in here so I can put the sump on and put all the seal on. There was a stud in here. I just took it out, and now I can fit the seal in there, which is great. So I'll get to doing that before I drop the sump on, obviously. So I'll do that now. So I managed to get that seal on no problem, moving that stud that was here, and then I could slide it around and it all fit on, which is good. Now I can get to actually putting the sump on. So guys, that's the oil pan on with stainless fasteners, again, which you can buy from my eBay store. So here's our short motor finished. We'll be throwing the heads on now. So before we put our cylinder head on the block, we want to make sure everything is clean. So we see we've got a bit of junk laying around, so we clean it all off, and then we can just put it on the dowels. So I've just got the heads sitting on here with a couple of bolts in them, but before you put the bolts in, is that you want to use some thread sealer. I'm just using this stuff on the threads, because some of the bolts go into the water jacket, which you don't really want water coming up them, because that will be all sorts of confusion. So all I'm going to do is put some thread sealer on all of them and go around and just nip them up a bit, and then I'll go around with the torque wrench. So there we go guys, it's our long block done. Now we've got to put push rods, rockers, the balancer and all the other little accessories, and then it'll be finished. So we're now at the point where things are a bit more exciting, starting to put lifters in. So before I took this engine apart, I bagged every set of lifters, and also I wrote on them which one the intake is and exhaust. So that's for cylinder 3. and you know, so on. I'll do the rest, and yeah, I'll get to it now. So I've now got all the rocker gear on the motor. So this is a solid cam, so you don't set preload. What I've pretty much done is you set a lash for a solid cam, and there is different ways you can do it depending on who you are, that you turn it so many degrees and you go through the firing order. But what all I do is I can see what lifters are up and down, and I've just done it to 0 cold lash for the moment for the first run in, and pretty much all I've done is tighten them all down until I've got a little bit of play, and then I turn the motor over again, go over all of them until none of them, well, they got a little bit of wiggle in them, so smidgen, but, and that should be good for the first fire up and run in and for the first 100 Ks or so. So as for the balancer, I have a new one here because the old one was roached, and how you can tell is that this rubber that connects the inertia ring to the hub, it was all perished and flaky. And what can happen if that happens is, where is it? Spin around. Ooh, there you go. That line there shows you in relation to your timing pointer where your ignition timing is. But if that rubber is buggered, this will slip and you'll get an incorrect reading. So I'm about to drop the manifold on the motor, and I'm using these Felpro gaskets, and I've got these crossovers as well which you can put in, that Felpro supply, that tries to eliminate heat soak that you might get in your carburetor or boiling fuel. So along here I'm just going to be using silicone. I won't be using the gaskets because the gaskets like to fall out, but yeah, we'll get to that. So there we go, guys, that's the finished product. So I've just dummied the carb up there so it looks nice. It's not the final sit on, but that's all done. I just did a few things, like put the dipstick in. There's nothing that interesting, on water pump and that sort of stuff. It's just putting stuff together. But yeah, that is pretty much sorted. So thank you for watching this far if you have, and that's the motor done. In the next video we'll be installing it into the car and prepping it for running, you know, all that sort of thing to make sure everything is good for this thing when we go for our first fire up and first drive and all that other stuff. But until then, we'll see you then, next time.